In 1994, Bethesda Game Studios presented us with a interesting idea, an interesting and unique game that wanted to provide a simulation of a fantasy world and allow you to be whoever you wanted to be. The game was titled Elder Scrolls Arena. Four mainline titles and a few little spin-offs later, we would see Elder Scrolls Online release in 2014, a massively multiplayer online RPG, Amorpiga, whatever you want to call it, WoW clone. And along with World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, it has become one of the biggest MMORPGs of all time. So we know it's a good MMO. That much can be argued. But is it a good Elder Scrolls game? And when I say this, I'm talking about, does it provide a good experience of being a simulation of living in a fantasy world? And the fantasy world, of course, that the Elder Scrolls has been forging for many years at this point. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And this intro is kind of garbage, but I'm probably going to keep it because I don't want to record it again. So, welcome to the Bravosity, and welcome to the Choice Words Podcast, Episode 3. I'm Brevin, and with me, once again, we have Nathaniel.
What up?
You may recognize that voice from our other episodes of Choice Words, our review discussions, and our top 5 Fallout 3 quests. We've talked a lot on the channel and off the channel about all kinds of things, video game, RPG, and we're both pretty big Elder Scrolls fans. I've played Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and a lot of ESO. Pretty deep into the end game. Not too much PvP. Nate, tell us a little bit about your history with the Elder Scrolls franchise.
Hi. I first started off playing Skyrim, but I've gone back and played some Morrowind. I can't deal with the stamina, but it is a good game. Just the stamina is just terrible to deal with.
Fatigue.
Fatigue, my bad. And then I played some of Oblivion, but haven't beat it yet. I have played hundreds of hours of Skyrim, though. I'm a huge freaking nerd. I've looked at the unofficial Elder Scrolls lore pages, so I know a lot of random shit about Elder Scrolls. Including some of the small spin-off games.
What is your experience with Elder Scrolls Online?
I've played quite a bit of it. I still haven't beat it, because I started off originally playing a Ebonheart Pact character with my brothers, but they stopped playing, so I restarted again, and then restarted another time, and just haven't so far been able to beat it yet. But
yeah, you've had about 3 characters that you keep like almost getting to the end game, almost hitting that max level, but then you like something happens, a new game comes out, or people you play with just stop playing, and then you end up just moving on to something else, and I understand that.
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls Online, compared to a lot of other MMORPGs, isn't too bad of a grind, but it can still definitely be a grind to get to that max level, and depending on what you're looking for, it can grow tiresome pretty fast. But we're not here to talk about whether Elder Scrolls Online is a good MMORPG. That much is absolutely clear. It's one of the biggest MMORPGs ever made in regards of how many people are playing it and how successful it is. And they release new expansions every year and smaller expansions throughout the year. It's a great MMORPG. There are things about it, even in the MMORPG space, that I don't really care for, that it doesn't do quite right. But today, we are here talking about whether or not Elder Scrolls Online is a good Elder Scrolls game. To you, Nate, what makes a good Elder Scrolls game?
Obviously, simulating the fantasy world, like, life. Like, you being an adventurer in a fantasy world. It's gotta simulate that. That's one of the main things. But I don't know. I think Elder Scrolls has always had at least some random spins to most fantasy tropes. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's necessarily like some profound work of art in all instances, but I don't know. I think just mainly the simulating adventure life in a fantasy world's probably the most likely, easiest thing to describe the goal of Elder Scrolls games to be.
I think we really see that with like Arena, Daggerfall, and I think it hits its apex in Morrowind.
Yeah,
All Arena and Daggerfall are a little more open, and they have, you could argue they have more simulation elements. I think Morrowind's combination of a really vivid setting, an interesting and unique setting, and not sacrificing too much of those simulation elements is just really why people look at it as the peak of the Elder Scrolls franchise. A lot of people look at it as that.
for sure.
Whereas Skyrim and Oblivion, their settings aren't
Yeah,
quite as unique or interesting. And obviously, that's subjective. That's my opinion. And Nate, I think you agree with me there.
okay. All right. Here, I have something to say about that. Skyrim could have been way more interesting if they went with the already established lore they had, but they watered it down to make it better for the general audience. But yeah, I'd say the actual setting, as long as it's in a fantasy world, no matter how like alien it is or original, doesn't necessarily matter for trying to simulate an adventurer's life. Though it definitely helps. It definitely helps for sure. It makes it more interesting when you make it like original. It just isn't quite necessary.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So when talking about Elder Scrolls Online, the first thing that's going to come to mind when talking about it being a good, whether or not it's a good Elder Scrolls game, whether or not it simulates living in a fantasy world well, is the fact that it's this massively multiplayer online game, and you're going to be seeing all kinds of other players running around doing weird things that citizens in this actual fantasy world wouldn't be doing, or wearing things that they wouldn't be wearing, and just
Parkour and
yeah,
hide and
just
seek.
generally yeah, parkour and hide and seek, and just generally being very weird and clearly not a part of this world. And to me, that's a double-edged sword. It makes it feel less immersive and less realistic in a lot of ways. But it can also add to your sense of immersion and being in this fantasy world because people are weird and do weird things, and you never know what's going to happen when you go walking down the street or especially in like a big city or something, and seeing all of these other players that are sort of unpredictable and, just going about whatever they're doing with not much concern for you. It's interesting and could be considered immersive because, every time you walk into Whiterun, everybody's sort of doing the same thing that they've been doing.
Yeah.
And you're always usually going to get the same kind of scene when you walk into each of those cities, and it's very clear how most people are going to act.
Yeah. It's actually not as immersive when you see them do the same three like tasks all the time. And also you only like Elder Scrolls games don't do a very good job at simulating a medieval environment in general. Like probably one of the best and most immersive medieval type games is Kingdom Come Deliverance, and the amount of like random NPCs doing all sorts of jobs in the background actually makes it super immersive, whereas Elder Scrolls games, they don't really have these random NPCs in the background that aren't tied into any quests doing random jobs. I mean, you see some blacksmithing, you see some bartending, and every once in a while you see somebody doing something that looks like it would be a job other than just waiting around for the main character to talk to them. But There's plenty of times, though, where it's not that immersive because they're very rarely ever up to something where they're not waiting for you to talk to them or doing the same two things.
I think a lot of that comes from the age of the games, though, as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's difficult for them to really do that way back in time. I'm getting like tons of rain hitting the window right now. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear that in the recording, but just a warning.
Okay, I think I can hear it a little bit, but it doesn't seem to be too bad. So we're just going to keep going. In Oblivion, they actually pioneered, for the most part, that kind of stuff. Like NPCs having their own unique routines and being able to do just unique things. But the way all that stuff worked, they ended up having to dial it way back because there was stuff like at first NPCs could go to jail and rob people, and they had like NPCs just buying every like one of these items or just like stealing all the time or murdering all the time, and they just couldn't get all those systems to work properly. And so they had to dial it way back. And that's something we see even in Kingdom Come Deliverance. There's a lot of glitchy stuff that isn't quite that immersive with how the NPCs act, and to make all these NPCs have their own routines and do all these things that's immersive, it takes a lot of manpower, and it can be very difficult, which is where the massively multiplayer online sense of Elder Scrolls Online can provide a more immersive experience to a point. Like, yes, they're doing some weird things. Yes, there's a chat box, and they're probably not talking. They're probably not role playing in the chat or in the voice chat. But
well, here's a good way to immerse yourself in that. Just make some headcanon that says there's a gigantic skooma epidemic that's spread across Tamriel, and there's just a bunch of skooma crackheads running around, and then boom, immersive.
I don't think we could qualify that. I don't think we could put that into like whether or not it's a good Elder Scrolls game, though. I don't think that that necessarily works.
I'm just messing around. But
I got you.
That is one way to get a little bit more immersed. Just, those people, they're probably on skooma when they're climbing up buildings and saying weird shit.
They should have added that to that should have been in the actual lore of the game. There's a large skooma epidemic.
Yep.
But it can be interesting, like when you're in a town and you see other people just going to the store, crafting things, going to the bank, or you see some Dark Brotherhood member just assassinate somebody right in front of you, or thieves just stealing shit all around you, and it can be really immersive to a point. And there is this whole thing where like there's only PvP in duels and in Cyrodiil, so even though you do see that guy, that Dark Brotherhood assassin assassinating somebody, like you don't have to feel threatened or afraid or anything, and that's where it sort of breaks down. You don't have to worry about these Thieves Guild members stealing from you, but it is still interesting to see them out in the world doing things, and vice versa. If you're the Dark Brotherhood member, it is kind of interesting to go out into the world and be assassinating people, although, like I said before, as the Dark Brotherhood member, you don't have to worry about, oh, this player's going to see me and then I'm going to get caught or anything, and so that's where it sort of falters and you lose that sense of immersion that it's sort of adding.
Yeah. But one thing is, though, that ruins a little bit of that immersion is the moment you see an NPC get killed and then they respawn within about 5 seconds. That's a little bit non-immersive. But here is something else I noticed. When random parties get thrown, that's actually pretty interesting. You just start seeing people dancing, and then all of a sudden a bunch of people start playing instruments nearby them. Yeah. And then it's like a random party breaks out in town square. That can be immersive in a way. I mean, when it happens all the time, it isn't. But when it happens every once in a while, it is. And,
right.
I don't know, randomly meeting adventurers and deciding you're going to go into this cave and clear it out of enemies, get loot. That's always nice. But if that was all scripted events with NPCs, it wouldn't be as interesting. But
Wouldn't
I
feel
think
as
you're always going to have to sacrifice a little bit of immersion for an MMO. I don't think it's ever going to be possible to fully immerse in an MMO.
yeah, absolutely. An interesting thing about Elder Scrolls Online is what makes it interesting and unique as an Elder Scrolls game is the fact that it's an MMO. Whereas what makes it interesting as an MMO and unique as an MMO is the fact that they're trying to make it feel like an Elder Scrolls game. They're trying to add those more immersive elements, somewhat of a story focus, not as much as like Final Fantasy 14, where you're just doing like a campaign. It's sort of linear. It's a bit more open than that, and not as quite as cinematic as something like that. But there definitely is a focus on the story and the writing, and that definitely helps with a sense of immersion. Um,
Yeah.
there is, like in the original main plot of the game, the story, it's very you are the chosen one, which
Yeah.
immediately feels jarring when everybody is the chosen one.
Yeah, that's true. And also beyond just the very main quest line, like there's a lot of stuff that breaks the lore of the game, of the games, the series. Like a lot of the events, the fact that there's never been a book about it, even though it's a prequel to most of the games,
Yeah.
and some
Even
of the games where they say the only time this has happened is in this moment in like a book or something in one of the other games, but then they throw in another time it happened into ESO, stuff like that. They
or the fact
mixed a ton of enemies into ESO also that come from places where they shouldn't necessarily be there.
a lot of the basically all of the factions, all three factions and their alliances make basically no sense.
Yeah. Like, why
Um,
is a slave going to all of a sudden join his slave master to fight alongside him? Like,
and there
when
there is
given the choice,
there is some
too.
interesting excuses that they put in there for that though. Like with the
Yeah.
Argonians, the Akaviri are, I believe it's the Akaviri, are invading Morrowind, Black Marsh, and Skyrim. So they decide to come together.
Yeah.
But then the whole thing is like, but then they got like 20 years later, whatever, couple hundred years later, they're just immediately enslaved again, and everybody
Yeah.
kind of forgot that they were free for a few hundred years.
And beyond that, like, the Akaviri invading again, I don't think was very good idea. Also, when they don't even show off any of the cool races from Akavir, they haven't showed off in the earlier games. It's just the same ones they've shown off before. But I don't necessarily think that that's a problem. It's just, I don't know, disappointing. But them having the Akaviri invade again was, I think, not very, like, lore accurate. But there's a lot of stuff like that. And
Yeah, I don't want to get
it's
too.
kind necessary, I think, for the scope of the game. Because the game's so large with so many quests, there's no way that they're going to make it fully lore accurate. And there's actually really cool things they added into the lore for the game.
I don't want to get into too many like talking about too many like specific lore issues that they had.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say that like overall, there are many lore issues.
Yeah.
Like the whole premise of the game is a lore issue with
But the scope needed it to have some lore breaks. There's no
yeah.
way they could build a game with that scope unless they made it a sequel to Skyrim, which I
Well,
think their next Elder Scrolls game wants to like play off of the events of Skyrim most likely. So they probably didn't want to do something like that.
Another reason they didn't want to do that is because it was in development at the same time as Skyrim.
Oh, oh yeah, that'd be super hard to try to match up storylines while like Skyrim's in development and that game's in development. That'd be
Yeah,
almost impossible to coordinate.
they actually had to like go back and redesign a lot of the Skyrim areas to make it look more like Skyrim, even though
Yeah, where's my
They're like
damn flying sky whales?
yeah,
Where are
yeah, and even
they?
though they're like 1,000 years apart or whatever, and so it's kind of weird that everything looks so similar to Skyrim.
Yeah,
That's
they
another
could have
problem
kept the
we see
sky
in a lot of
whales in
places.
there. Could have kept them in there, just said
You
that they
just
got hunted to extinction. That would
you
have been
want those sky
badass.
whales so bad.
I do. That was such a cool premise. Like, just imagine a bunch of Nords having to climb up mountains to hunt flying whales.
They
That
should
is
have just
cool.
used those instead of dragons.
The flying whale apocalypse.
Yeah,
Yes.
it'd be more unique.
That would
Um,
be very unique.
and they could they could operate in literally the exact same way.
Yeah. And they probably could have animated them well so that they wouldn't have had to sacrifice the dragons to not have their front legs and rather be wyverns because they
All
couldn't
right,
animate that well enough, Yeah,
we
we're
gotta
getting
quit
way off
shitting on
track here.
Skyrim. Talk about
Yeah,
Elder Scrolls Online here.
but I will say though that I think they did an okay job with getting the environments. But
there
I
are a lot
mean,
of very
we've talked
diverse
about this
environments.
multiple times before about how it's kind of the theme park where you go to a
Yeah,
place and it's not really fleshed out. It's just like, oh, I've heard about that in the lore. I know this place. That's cool. And then you leave.
and that sort of makes me think, not just compared to the other games, the lore issues are even like there's lore contradictions within this game, like lore that they set up that they then contradict um, throughout this game, or just doesn't feel like it makes much sense. Rather than saying that the lore contradicts itself, what I'm going to say is that the gameplay contradicts the lore that's going on.
Yeah,
If you get what
for
I'm
sure.
saying, like one thing is you can go to you can play a high elf who is a in the Aldmeri Dominion, which is one of the factions, and as playing that, you're only going to get to see um, the some of Somerset and Valenwood and the
Elsewhere.
elsewhere. But you can go to the other faction zones. But the one of the biggest problems with that is you will be treated as if you're a part of their group and not if you're a part like you're a part of the other group.
Yeah,
There was a
that's a
lore
little bit weak.
explanation for this, and if you beat the whole story, there is a lore explanation that Meridia, I think that's the Daedric Prince that does it, gives you the ability to see through the eyes of the other factions. But as it's set up right now, you don't have to beat the main story to do that, and I usually didn't, and so it's a bit jarring.
Yeah. Like, you go from being part of the Daggerfall Covenant, and then you go to the Ebonheart Pact and have to fight your own side for no real
Yeah.
reason without having the lore explanation from beating the game. I'd like to talk about some that I think this game actually does really, really good job at helping simulate the adventure in like a fantasy world type
Let's hear it.
life. The actual fighting mechanics are way more intelligent and way more interesting and immersive than any of the other Elder Scrolls games. And the reason why I think that is because how many abilities you can have slotted makes it to where you don't have to constantly pause the game and switch an ability 24/7, and
Yeah.
how you can have more interesting spells other than, oh, my hand's just glowing this certain color for this school of magic, and I'm casting the spell the exact same way I would cast another spell of a different school of magic. It's like there's actually more interesting animations going on that makes it to where something different's happening. It's not just the same thing when you're casting magic or doing like ability with your weapon. That's another thing, is most of the other games you're just hacking and slashing for a lot of the games, at least.
Hacking and whacking and smacking.
Yep, chopping that
Butcher
meat,
Pete.
but
You
but
got a long, sharp knife.
yeah, practically, if you're not playing a magic character, you're just
Hitting that right
slashing
trigger.
for almost the whole game.
Or left
Unless you're playing one of the older games where you can slash from different sides and stab. That was actually a really cool idea. But
yeah.
in ESO, there's actually like special abilities along with the weapon you're holding, or like stamina-based abilities that are like weapon or martial arts. And I thought that was way more interesting than what most of the other games had, and more immersive. Because it's like, why am I only slashing with this weapon? Why can't it be stabbing, slashing, I don't know, doing crazy sword tricks?
Yeah, and it
instead of
makes
just
you
watching it go back and forth as I hit the trigger constantly.
It makes you feel like you have unique skills and like tactics with your style of combat that other people don't necessarily have.
Yeah.
And I definitely get what you're saying and agree with the whole you don't have to pause combat. Well, you can't, as the mothers of millions of children fail to understand. You can't pause an online game, and
Yeah.
um, and so that's what basically made them make this big change to this style of combat. And I will say, it's probably more immersive. It's definitely more immersive than something like Skyrim.
Well, even the other games, they don't quite have the same scope of stamina abilities in combat, and magic abilities, for that matter, too.
I would say Oblivion, it's still a step up, I would say, from Oblivion, but I would say Morrowind, the way a lot of the spells allow you, I would say the spells are better in Morrowind, because they allow you to manipulate the world and people and yourself. Like, you have spell abilities that make you fly, and their whole fast travel system is built on...
like environment traversal, though, rather than actual combat.
And that's what I'm saying. You don't have anything like that in ESO. You just have mounts.
Yeah, you're true.
You don't have...
Well, I mean, you're right. That's true.
You don't have any non-combat spells and abilities, and I think that's really what makes Morrowind and some of the, even like Daggerfall and Arena, feel so much like simulations of this fantasy world, because, you know, you could charm somebody, which you can even do that in some of the later ones, but you can charm somebody and then they'll have a better disposition towards you, and then maybe you can get a better price on their goods, or you can get them to tell you something they wouldn't before. And that's something we don't see in ESO. And another thing that brings down that sense of simulation of a fantasy world in ESO compared to the other games is the classes and the way a lot of magic works. I fully understand from an MMO perspective, especially with their PvP, and I mean how good it's been for a long time, why they want classes, and that allows them to maintain a balance. And in regards to an MMO, it still has probably the most open skill system and character building system out of almost any MMO. The way you can mix and match different things to create your own unique character is extremely interesting. But comparing it to some of the old Elder Scrolls games, even Skyrim, there's more of a sense of reality. Like, we have all of the schools of magic. That feels much more realistic. Yeah. Different fields of science, different fields of study in regards to the magic. And another thing is that all of the enemies use the same toolkit that you use for the most part.
I would say, though, that that's a double-edged sword with Skyrim's, because at a certain point, you can just become good at everything. And I don't think that's usually immersive. I mean, it makes sense for the Dragonborn, because, you know, they're the chosen one type character. But being good at everything is not that immersive, I don't think, in most games. While also being confined to a class system isn't necessarily immersive either.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really difficult to find a real balance there. But definitely when think about it, the class system is a more apparent, unimmersive problem, but it
Comparing
definitely
it
is
to
necessary for MMOs.
comparing it to Oblivion's class system, I think we can see how a class system can work at limiting your character and still being extremely immersive.
Yeah,
Oblivion has probably one of the best class systems out of any game, but the customizability of that class system wouldn't work in an MMO, really.
yeah. But they still make sure there's plenty of things you can do with getting certain skill trees that any class can get.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that was that probably took so much work from a balancing perspective to like do.
Yeah,
But I really like it, and also how you can see some of the skills that aren't really something you'd see in an MMO play into your game. That's actually really interesting because for the most part, you're not going to need a lot of skills that'd be in a normal RPG in an MMO, and they really fit them in there pretty well. I mean, sometimes it's a little odd, but it's nice that they're there.
I will say they do persuasion and intimidation better than Skyrim does. There's way more opportunities to use it than in Skyrim.
Yeah,
Um, but it is
and
strange that you get each of those skills from the Mage's Guild as persuasion and the Fighter's Guild as intimidation, respectively.
that is
Um,
weird. You're right.
but that's another thing that is interesting, that you have these like guild skill lines and different skill lines for different fields, because it feels like the Fighters Guild would have unique tactics and the Mages Guild would have unique abilities, and
Yeah.
it feels satisfying learning those. But similar to Skyrim, you can complete the entire Mages Guild quest as a full-on warrior without using a single spell in
Yeah, it's a little
ESO,
bit
and vice
unimmersive.
versa with the Fighters Guild.
And then become Archmage even though they've watched you use a sword the whole time.
And another big barrier in ESO, especially looking at the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, is a lot of the stuff you have to pay for. It's like you have the opportunity to go, you can go anywhere in Tamriel and go do stuff, and you can join the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, but you're going to have to pay for it. And overall, I think their system is pretty well done and pretty fair, other than when you get into all the smaller microtransactions. Their
Yeah.
actual expansion system and the subscription, I think, is pretty fair. And
Also, I was going to say this is actually a nice touch that they could easily add this into any single player RPG. And I think that this is something that would be nice to see more often is getting unique abilities from joining certain groups, and it doesn't happen nearly as often as
no,
it could, but
I
I think
agree.
that that's nice when they add in like a whole set of skills that is based on a certain group that can't be learned elsewhere, because then it adds like more immersion towards the group, being a part of that group, and
Yeah, and they're coming up
can
with their own ideas.
yeah, and can also like really add to the lore as well. Take, say, like some kind of weird martial arts you could only learn from, say, a certain group. That'd be really cool to add into one of those games. And like, I know that Fallout New Vegas did very, very light. Like, you can learn certain abilities from specific people, and I really like that. I
Yeah,
think
I
it should
think
be
that's
added into
just
games
unarmed
more
though.
often. Yeah, that is just
But
unarmed.
but I get what you're saying. Applying that same sense to a broader scope is sort of what ESO does.
Yeah, and I think that that definitely made being a part of a group more immersive, generally.
And talking about groups, we also have the fact that you can create your own groups, your own guilds, and so you can create, whatever kind of group you want to see in Tamriel. And obviously, it's up to you if it's going to be if you're going to actually role play through that group, or if it's just going to be a group of like-minded people. But there are a decent amount of role play guilds that do interesting things.
Join the Peruvian Alliance, trust me.
The
I forgot we even
Peruvian
had that
Hawaiian.
guild till now, but yeah, and like the guilds are
It's
an interesting aspect, though generally they're not going to be role playing. They still can, and they can still add that element to it.
there
And
could
then,
be a bigger push to adding those sort of role-playing elements. Like there is player housing, but it's mainly microtransaction based, and there is a
yeah,
decent amount of stuff you can do with that sort of role play with your group. But the fact that it's so embedded in the microtransaction system really bothers me and makes me not want to give them really any
money.
props for that. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the microtransaction system. It'd be cool if it was mainly rewards from doing well in the game and crafting stuff to make all of it without having to do microtransactions. That'd be cool if
talking
that was the
about
main thing.
crafting in regards to immersion.
Yes.
There are a wide variety of crafting skills, and way you learn them, the way you learn all skills is just by doing them, just like all the other Elder Scrolls game, which I'm really glad is a part of this game, and I think works really well. But one thing I will say about the crafting and the equipment in general, while it's good for an MMO and being able to look however you want, the separation of stats and the look of the gear
Yeah.
is extremely immersion breaking.
Yeah, where the look looks like you should be some 1,000-year-old badass mage or something, and it's just relatively normal quality gear.
Yeah, and you can make by crafting you can make any piece of gear look Daedric, or you could make an amazing piece of gear look like leather that is barely covering anything. That
Yeah.
definitely hurts the immersion.
But on another perspective, when you're using it like an outfit, covering up whatever armor you have, it can also add immersion as well in instances where you have mismatched armor and you still
Yeah.
want to like look a certain level and stuff. It can have benefits and drawbacks to the immersion, but the crafting is interesting and uses a lot more resources. And I think that's more interesting by a long shot than Skyrim's crafting. Skyrim and I mean, like just about all the Elder Scrolls games have used the same few metals. You don't even worry about the wood that goes into whatever you're making. And like gemstones don't matter. Leather only matters for leather armor, even if you see later armor that has leather straps in it. Other than, I guess, the leather straps in Skyrim, you need tons of those. But I don't know. There's a lot of stuff where the crafting's not as intuitive as it could be, but Elder Scrolls Online actually did a step above most Elder Scrolls games.
Another thing is you can embed unique traits into each of your items. And the way you learn these traits, you have to dismantle and research an item that already has it. And there is like a time limit on that where you can only do one a day, which is annoying and can be a problem.
So
But
it's
it
kind of
is
like
interesting
the
that you can't do that.
enchanting system in Skyrim, where you have to dismantle an enchanted item to learn the enchantment.
Yeah, it is like that, except these are traits, which are slightly different than enchantments. You can also put enchantments on there.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
whole other crafting system.
yeah, and I think that's actually more interesting in a certain sense because something I've wanted to see for a long time in these games is like, say it's a certain kind of metal, but a sword being a certain kind of metal, that's not even the most important aspect. It's more like the type of sword you
Craftsmanship.
made. Yeah, and the craftsmanship. The craftsmanship and the type of sword you made. I thought it'd be cool if they made like crafting patterns that are like you can make an iron sword that's like curved or an iron sword that's I don't know, like normal short sword, gladius, things like that. Well, I think having the traits might actually be an even better way than doing it where it's like you have a crafting pattern and a medal. Now you have a medal and all these traits you can add to it.
I think that in a mainline Elder Scrolls game, and even I don't know about putting it into ESO. Definitely wouldn't want to change it at this point because everybody's used to
Yeah,
the other system. But connecting the traits to the visual design,
yeah,
or even the material to the visual design, would be a lot better because I really think that being able to make the item look however you want is convenient and it's good to be able to look how you want, but it it doesn't feel quite as immersive as some of the older games. Also, the colored rarities that we see in all kinds of looters and MMOs, and it originated back in Diablo, where you've got like gray weapons, green, and then blue and purple, and then legendaries. And the fact that each weapon has a level, and they get better as the levels go up, I think that's a bit immersion shattering too. It doesn't
yeah,
feel as immersive as the mainline Elder Scrolls games, where you're not going to find a level 1 iron sword and then a level 50 iron sword, and one's way better than the other. An iron sword is an iron sword, and it does what it does.
yeah. But it is something that's also very necessary for an MMO. It's not something they could have really avoided too easily.
Yeah, unless they made it like a sandbox game, but that's a whole
Yeah.
different goal and whole different kind of project.
Yeah, and then it
Um,
kind of like I think it'd be harder to make sure that like new player doesn't just immediately get pretty good gear and then go fight some like giant boss. Making sure there's leveled gear makes sure that the new player can't just go beat the game super early by beating a giant boss or something.
yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
Um,
like
but if you have good,
I get it.
well, I was gonna say if you have good world design, you can avoid that as well. But when you have a high level player that can give things to a low level player,
Yeah,
um,
and then
you have that
also
issue.
it's really hard to make a world design that's like closed off when it comes to an MMO, I think, for the most part. Like,
I mean, you could definitely make a closed off
like
world design in an MMO, but
could,
uh,
but it
trying to
would
make an Elder
also
Scrolls,
like I think it could also make immersion breaking if you tried to make sure the player can't go to this area till they reach a certain level or something.
yeah,
But in that case, you are barring gear by level still, just making sure the gear is in an area the player can't get to.
yeah. But sort of shifting gears, bringing up something a little bit random. Earlier, I was talking about the to use a pretentious game critic word, the Ludo narrative dissonance, which just means, if you don't know, it just means that the gameplay doesn't line up with the story. So way more simple than it sounds, but we see this throughout like the whole of ESO,
See this
especially.
throughout the whole of Elder Scrolls for the most part. Like only the best Elder Scrolls games have avoided this.
Yeah, and I mean every game has it. Usually
Yeah,
has it at least to a point, but Elder Scrolls Online is really bad about it. Especially when it comes to all of the open world quests, all of the zone quests. You have these people talking about how powerful these monsters are, or whatever, and because of the scaling system, which scales everything to your level, the way it works, everything is always way too easy in the open world zone quests. It is
yeah,
so easy that that's one of the main reasons I stopped playing the game. You could talk on a larger scale about how that really is a big problem in this game as even an MMO, but when talking about just the immersion sense of it and how good of an Elder Scrolls game ESO is, it really breaks your immersion when they're talking about this great enemy, this great threat, and
and
then
then
you
you
just
kill
go in
it.
there and yeah, you don't have to even think, and it's just destroyed. Like when you melt everything in sight so quickly,
Yeah.
it
Well, I
really
do
brings down the weight of the story.
I do remember before they made the level scaling, where even though I was a high level for the starting areas, I made it into the next area, and it took me and my full team of people, which at the time I think were just my brothers and one of their friends, who were all about the same level, took all of us to kill like a single saber cat
But the
in
zone
like
was
Riften. But the zone was higher level than we were needing to be there for. But I remember how difficult it used to be, just like before they did the level scaling.
yeah.
And I don't know, I think the level scaling made it to where new players had an easier time at playing the game. And they could play with their high level friends who've been playing for years. And I get
But
that, but it also took away that immersion to a certain extent, and also I think did sacrifice a bit as an MMO.
when looking at level scaling, it's not the idea of level scaling that bothers me, it's the execution. Strangely enough, the game that I've played that did level scaling the best is Fallout 76. Game has tons and tons of problems, tons of things it does wrong. But the level scaling system they implemented in the One Wasteland update is so excellent. Each zone has like a range of levels that they'll scale to, so they won't go past a certain point low in some zones. They won't go past a certain point high in other zones, but it's a very wide margin, and it makes sure that new players can easily play through like 75% of the content, even with max level players. But the biggest difference between ESO's level scaling and Fallout 76's level scaling is the way Fallout 76's level scaling works. Each particular enemy type still poses a different threat than other enemy types. Like, no matter what level you are, 1 to 100, the super mutant is still going to be stronger than just a regular raider, and the raider is still going to be stronger than a mole rat. So everything sort of keeps this same level of difficulty and allows each enemy type to shine and be unique, and while still moving along with your levels and still leveling up with you. And so what that does to me is, like, every time you see a super mutant, you know what you're getting into. And it doesn't matter what level it is, it's going to be right around the same level as you, so it's the same sort of difficulty. And we don't see that with ESO very much. There's different types of content, and that's how you judge the difficulty. And that sort of breaks the immersion. Like, this is a world boss, so I know it's going to be difficult and need a group of people. But sometimes a world boss, a particular world boss, in regards to the story and the lore, shouldn't be more difficult than the whoever you're fighting through the story. We see this as a big problem in their big chapter DLCs. Like in Somerset, 3 sea slodes, or a certain number of sea slodes, are invading Somerset, and one of them is working in the main story. Is supposed to be the most powerful one. Basically, he's working with these Daedric princes to take down the Crystal Tower. Sorry if I'm getting any of this like slightly wrong, but
Crystal Tower.
Their tower thing that holds like Nirn together. But that's not the important thing. He wants to destroy this tower, and he's brought up as the biggest bad of the Sea Slodes. But then you go to the Trial, which is a raid, a 12-man raid, and that Sea Slode takes 12 seasoned adventurers to fight, whereas the one that was supposed to be the leader of them only takes one guy, and you can mop the floor with him in seconds.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's not very immersive, for sure. But here's something that's a little less important, but I think actually help benefit, is the variety of everything was very nice.
Yeah.
Like, the variety of weapons that have unique looks and armors that have unique looks, and the variety of enemies. Even though there's some enemies with different names, but they're practically a different colored version of something else.
Yeah.
like, especially when it comes to bugs, giant bugs in the game. There's like multiple that have different names, but they're the same
depending on
exact model with a different color.
right,
But
depending on what location they're in. There's like a
for the
fire
most
beetle, and
part,
then there's a frost beetle.
yeah. For the most part, though, like, that variety, I think, really helped with immersion. Skyrim, it got to a certain extent where you're seeing the same iron and steel armor for the whole beginning of the game way too often.
I mean,
You're
you're seeing
same
that.
couple armors.
You're seeing that in the end game. Even when you go into a bandit camp,
Yeah.
they're still wearing that armor.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense for the bandits and everything, but I'm saying, like, you're seeing, even in the loot chests, some of the most basic armor for most of the game. And then when you level up again, it's still the choice between, like, say now you're level 30, and now it's starting to get into more armors. It's still the same choice of about 4 different armors you could decide to wear that still fit your level. And that'd probably be, like, Dwarven, Steel Plate, and then, like, Elvish.
Another
like
thing is,
but, like, that isn't very immersive. ESO, though, you have, like, I don't even know how many armor pieces they have, but I remember even at level 1, you can still get, like, a good, I don't know, 15 that I can think of off the top of my head that makes sense for a level 1 character. And that's only from the starting area you choose. The other starting areas have special armors you can get from those places too.
and that's an interesting thing. Is like Skyrim, it's almost always a Skyrim's version of this armor. Like the iron armor is Nordic looking, or it just looks like it's from Skyrim. Even the like elven armor and some of the armor that isn't even really from Skyrim has this falls in line with some of the designs of the other armor, and they all sort of have the same kind of vibe to them. There are definitely some standouts that look different.
Red
but in
armor.
ESO, there is. Wait, what did you say?
Red Guard armor. That's the only, like, super interesting one that stands out from the Nordic armors.
The Daedric armor stands out.
Well, yeah, Daedric armor, but I mean, it also is it made a very different look than it ever did in the earlier games too. But they definitely did a great job with ESO, making sure there's different styles of armor based on the same metal. Like
and something
Orcish
that,
and Nordic can all be thrown in there on the same metal.
That adds to the immersion as well is, like, if you go to Skyrim, your drops are going to be Skyrim themed. If you go to Somerset, you're going to get Somerset themed drops. And that could be, that adds to the immersion a lot. Talking about, moving from these open world zones, I want to talk a little bit about dungeons, and how immersive they are and how they compare to other Elder Scrolls dungeons. And when I'm talking about dungeons, I'm not talking about like delves, which are smaller scale dungeons that can be done by yourself. I'm talking about the group dungeons, the instance dungeons. And one of the biggest problems with these is if you go through the group finder, and you try to go with random people, which is what the majority of players are going to go through these dungeons doing, at least in the beginning. The majority of new players, I believe, use the group finder because I find groups all the time. You're not going to feel very immersed. You're not going to be able to listen to the story because everybody's just going to be running ahead. And that causes a big problem. Whereas if you have 3 other friends, if you have a group of 4, and you can go through the dungeons, you can actually find them in the zone and then travel into them rather than just being teleported through the dungeon finder. It does provide that sense of immersion, and then you can actually listen to the story and feel immersed in this dungeon rather than like we see with the dungeon finder, which is not at all immersive.
Yeah. Well, another thing is, this is something where they don't have a huge variety. I mean, they still have a variety that, I mean, probably matches or is still better than most of the other Elder Scrolls games, but because of the scope of this, it's more expected for them to have more of a variety. That's like architecture, buildings. You see a lot of copy and paste of the same buildings, even all the way across to Tamriel. So like
Yeah, there's
some
many,
Somerset buildings look exactly the same as some of the buildings you were seeing in like Morrowind or Skyrim.
yeah.
But
You see many, many dwarven ruins. What's the other group that has all the ruins?
Alien,
Yeah, at Ayleid ruins. In places where at least I didn't think there was those kinds of ruins.
at least
I
in
may
the
have
other
been
games
wrong.
there wasn't. But in
Like lore-wise, is before ESO did Hammerfell have dwarven ruins?
um I don't know if Hammerfell had Dwarven Ruins, but I know Ayleid spread across almost every single bit of Tamriel except for
Yeah.
Black Marsh.
And it's not.
Um,
It doesn't really matter that much in the lore, I guess. That's not my
yeah,
problem. The problem is
especially
that it just
since
feels
like
samey.
yeah, especially since like what you're seeing in the games lore-wise is an interpretation of the land. Like there's way
Yeah.
more cities in Skyrim than the sum that you get in the actual game. Like lore-wise, there's a lot more towns than what you're actually seeing in the game,
And
and the
they're
towns are supposed to be bigger.
yeah.
And I mean, you could like that's definitely more of a technological limitation that's caused them to have to draw that back. But you could argue that ruins immersion a little bit. I don't think it matters too much, but the architecture in ESO still outclasses every other Elder Scrolls game. It's just you'd expect a
The
larger scope with
the
such
scale.
with such a scale of the game. You'd expect a larger scope.
Well, no, I was gonna say the scale of Elder Scrolls Online also outclasses every other Elder Scrolls game. The cities feel much
Yes.
more proper sized. They still
Yeah.
feel a bit small compared to regular cities, as just about any video game is, unless the game takes place all in one city, they're gonna feel smaller.
Kingdom
Um,
Come Deliverance. That game did a pretty good job for city sizes, but then again, years difference, technology's going to be different. It's not in MMO,
yeah,
so
that I mean
it's
that is
kind
an
of hard
indie
to
studio
compare.
that was kickstarted, so that's super impressive.
That is
Um,
super impressive,
but
but
we should talk about Kingdom Come Deliverance another time. I actually would
we
like to do
definitely
a
should.
choice words where we talk about what the Elder Scrolls could learn from Kingdom Come Deliverance.
I think that'd be a great topic, but do you have any other main points you'd like to bring up?
Finishing talking about the cities and the scale that they've got. There's every city does have very similar things. They have to hit all the beats that you need in your city in an MMO, but most cities I've seen seem like actual operating cities with slight, like there's a bit of logic to the cities, whereas something like Skyrim and even Oblivion, the logic of their cities was pretty poor.
You know what? Now that I think about it, there's like running water that goes through Whiterun. Where are they even getting the water? I just thought about that. Where's the water coming from?
Isn't there a river outside of Whiterun?
Yeah, but there's no water being brought to Whiterun. Unless there's like a spring going through it or something. I don't know. Whiterun's not very, like, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a fantasy world. The city doesn't really necessarily make sense other than the fact it's on a high up thing so that it can look around the valleys easy
I mean, I think
and can
I
be
think
well
that goes
defended.
for like
But
all of Skyrim cities, though.
yeah, well, I mean, you just need like a river that the town is connected to for most things. But a lot of games have this problem. It's kind of hard to judge too much when almost every game does this, where their world building isn't quite logical in any sense.
But I
But
was just saying that
I
I
would
think
say,
ESO does
yeah,
a better
ESO
job.
does a better job for sure. It's like there's some cities where you can see one of the main points of the city is that it's a huge like harbor or something. Actually, that most of the cities you start off in have, or not the very first, but when you actually get to connect to mainland Tamriel, you're usually going to a city that has a huge harbor. And you actually see like dock workers walking around. There's animations where they look like they're looking through boxes and stuff. It makes them look like they're doing a job. And that tied into what we were saying way earlier, where the NPCs look like they're doing something.
Yeah, most NPCs aren't just standing there unless they're quest givers. Quest givers usually do just stand there.
Yeah,
and then
like
they
Mr. Elliot
after.
during lunch.
Hands on his shoulders, staring off
Yeah.
into the distance.
He looks like he's about to hand out a quest.
That is a deep cut that no one will understand because it's so personal to us.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you could probably relate with that. Certain
If
people.
only we could just take a picture of him, and then everyone would understand exactly what we mean.
I'll try to get some kind of picture of some teacher or something that looks like he's standing there waiting for a quest.
Yeah. Well, like, other than when people are in their houses too, which is actually more interesting. You can break into someone's house and they'll be in the house, and you have to try to hide from them, even though the sneaking mechanics are a little wonky.
I would say they're they're not great.
They're still like, it's still the Skyrim type sneaking, but sometimes you can walk like right next to the person and they don't hear you. And I don't know if light levels actually matter when it comes to sneaking in ESO, but they do matter in Skyrim to a certain extent. You won't notice it for the most part, though.
The stealth gets a little more in-depth in the Dark Brotherhood and Thieves Guild quest line. There's like hiding places, and people walk around with torches, which will allow them to see you better. And you also get actual sneak attacks, which are one-shot kills on most enemies or NPCs. And you get pickpocketing as well.
You know what?
Yeah, there's no, like, you can't use bows. There's no spells that will aid in your sneaking. There's no illusion spells, and so overall, I think the stealth is pretty poor.
We could argue that is actually a major flaw in how it is in Elder Scrolls games. Since the very first Elder Scrolls game, it has been the mage, the warrior, and the thief being like the main class archetypes. And while they do a good job at being a rogue while fighting, with all the stamina abilities, it doesn't really feel like there's much other than just the fighting abilities. And as you said, with even when they expanded the sneak, bows aren't even connected into the sneak ability stuff. And that actually might be a legit flaw when it comes to being an Elder Scrolls game. But I can't really imagine how they would do it well in an MMO. I think that's also another necessary sacrifice for what they're trying to accomplish.
It works decently, like I said, in the Dark Brotherhood DLC and the Thieves Guild. It is decent.
But it does require a DLC or expansion.
Or the subscription.
Yeah, or the subscription.
Which I think if you're going to be playing a lot of ESO, the subscription is the best way to go. But I'm not going to give you buying advice. It's ultimately your decision, and we're not really reviewing ESO. We're just talking about it as an Elder Scrolls game.
Also, the likelihood of you being able to pay for the subscription and just play through a lot of this stuff rather than spend all the money to have it forever, it's definitely cost effective.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing it does better than Skyrim in regards to the sneaking and the stealth as well is you can't just sell your stolen items to anybody. There's thieves' dens where you will find fences and you can pay off your bounties, and that's where you can sell your stolen items. And that's a bit more
Can't sell
interesting.
your stolen items to anyone in Skyrim unless you turn them into a fence.
I thought you could sell stolen items to everybody. Am I wrong? I must be wrong.
I don't think you can. If I remember right, you have to go to the fence in the Thieves Guild to sell your stolen items, or reach a certain speech skill level to then turn a merchant into a fence. And I think there
Don't
might.
they have?
I
Is
can't
there like an
remember
actual
if.
mercantile skill still?
What do you mean? No mercantile.
Skyrim?
It's just speech. But yeah, it's speech. Well, I think I can't remember this exactly because it has been quite some time since the last time I played it. But I thought there was also a way you could like steal an item in one hold and then go to another hold where they don't know you and sell it. Well, I really can't remember if that's true or not.
I don't believe so. I do believe you have to. Or you're talking about Skyrim?
Yeah, Skyrim.
Okay. Yeah, in ESO you have to go to the fences.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that Elder Scrolls has had a hard time figuring that out, like crime in general, pretty well because like it's kind of like hiding your identity is something you can't do in the Elder Scrolls games. So like, say they just saw this dude wearing full steel plate armor, they can't see his face, they don't know what race he is, and they saw him steal all their shit from their house. And then later on, you're wearing completely different armor, and they know exactly who you are.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem within a lot of them. That's not very immersive, but that's all Elder Scrolls games.
When talking about ESO in particular, one thing they utterly fail at, which I can't necessarily blame them too much because it is an MMO, is the crime and punishment system. There is no prison system like in previous Elder Scrolls games, which they actually could have done something. They could have made that really interesting, where you could have like your buddies come break you out.
That would have been super cool, but that'd be so difficult to work out. And then, I mean, you'd still be wanted if you break out of jail. The people still aren't happy that you broke out.
I think it could have worked. Like, I don't know necessarily what the penalty would be for going to prison. Maybe you lose. I mean, the way that it worked in the other Elder Scrolls game was you lose progress to your next level ups. But I can see people being extremely pissed about that in an MMO.
Yeah, in an MMO, that would be rough.
That's a big difference. But another one of the big problems is that all of the guards in ESO, I don't know when this change was implemented, but as of now, all of the guards in ESO are invincible. You can't damage them, you can't kill them.
I remember back when you could kill the guards, but
and it would just
new ones
coming,
would show up. Yeah.
Which I don't understand. There really wasn't anything wrong with that system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there must have been
somebody had some way of farming them.
Right.
If someone was farming them, I understand it. And I guess that's immersive breaking. You can't commit crimes or else the invincible guards show up to beat you down.
Exactly.
But I would argue that is something that makes sense in an MMO, but I don't know. I don't think that making them invincible was a good idea. But their crime system being kind of poorly made, it's something that only really makes sense for an MMO.
So overall, to wrap this up, we've talked about, so you could say this is somewhat obvious, but the biggest flaws in regards to ESO being a good Elder Scrolls game come from it being an MMO and some of the struggles they had to go through to make it a good MMO. But despite all of those problems that it has because it's an MMO, I do think it is a pretty good Elder Scrolls game, and they did the best job they could at making it a good Elder Scrolls game set in an MMO type world.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like, I'd actually say that it does better in some aspects than some of the other Elder Scrolls games in certain aspects. And then almost all the ones that it fails at, or does not as well, it doesn't really fail at anything too much. It just doesn't do things as well as it could have for the most part, is all stuff that's necessary for its game type. Like, there's not really a way that they could get away with a lot of the stuff that they come short on and it still be an MMO.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly think that it's something people should pick up if they like the Elder Scrolls genre, or not genre, the Elder Scrolls series, because it is definitely a worthy addition to the game.
Yeah, to me, it's almost like the ultimate version of Skyrim, other than mods.
Skyrim Ultimate Edition. It's just ESO.
Yeah, because it basically takes everything that Skyrim does well, and ramps
makes a
it
lot
up.
of it better. Yeah,
Yeah.
because a lot of the stuff that this game has had flaws at is in the same spot that Skyrim's had flaws at.
Right.
Even though Skyrim didn't need to have these flaws to be an MMO, they just did it anyways. And I think in plenty of ways it does a lot of things way better than Skyrim. And it does some things equal with some of the other games. Like, you're right with the traversal of the environment and like using mage abilities and stuff for non-combat purposes. Morrowind definitely does the best job when it comes to that.
And I think even Oblivion and even Skyrim do a little bit better of a job at that than ESO, because they have some stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which ESO has nothing in that regard.
Would say, though, when it comes to combat, ESO's magic and skill system is, I think, the best for the most part.
But I think
really, like, it doesn't fit the same formula as Elder Scrolls games, though.
Yeah.
But I think it does a better job at being an immersive fantasy world adventurer because of all these skills.
I think their lack of the schools of magic is my big problem.
Yeah, that is
with the Elder Scrolls Online.
I was gonna say, it's not necessarily how they fit the skills in to the game without having like the schools of magic and having a class system. It's just the fact that there is such a variety, and the fact there's so many stamina-based skills that you don't get to see. Like, in Skyrim, the only real reason to level up your stamina too much is to carry more and to run farther for a longer period of time.
Do more heavy attacks.
Yeah, do more heavy attacks, but honestly, that's not even necessary sometimes. You don't even need to really do heavy attacks if you just walk in and just keep hitting the trigger fast enough. But that game makes sure that you need to use your abilities in fights, generally, except when, as you said, once the level scaling was added and everything, and enemies became something you can just mop the floor with instantly.
But if you're fighting world bosses or public events or dungeons or trials,
then it works pretty well. It's just those like random in the open world enemies where you just kind of walk up to them and just destroy them instantly.
Yeah.
And at that point, they kind of just become more of an annoyance and not a challenge. But
also,
like,
being able to work as a
way more interesting combat.
Being able to work as a team and fill more specific roles, I think, helps the immersion as well. Like being able to be a tank where you're built entirely on defense, or being a healer where you're built entirely on buffing and healing your other people in your group. I think that adds to the immersion as well, because you can't just be a healer in any of the other Elder Scrolls games, and you can't just focus on defense in any of the other Elder Scrolls games.
For sure. And that's also, I think, kind of something that's specific with the genre, as well as these class
Yeah,
types
absolutely.
are kind of necessary in a lot of the fantasy adventure genre, because Elder Scrolls, it definitely got a lot of inspiration from D&D. Like most of the fantasy RPG games have gotten a lot of inspiration from D&D. There's actually a legit formula to their classes, with having the heavy damaging wizard, the heavy armor wearing tank, and stuff like that. And I think, like, it definitely helps with the immersion for that. That's, like, I don't know. ESO does a very, very good job at being an Elder Scrolls game, in my opinion.
I think I would definitely agree, and I think as well what makes it such a unique and popular and interesting MMO is the immersive things and the more unique things, the level of customization and stuff that we see put into it because it's trying to be like an Elder Scrolls game.
Yeah, for sure.
And there you have it. Is Elder Scrolls Online a good Elder Scrolls game? For me and Nate,
Yes.
the answer is yes. Uh, Thank you for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if you didn't. Comment down below what you think of Elder Scrolls Online, if you think it's a good Elder Scrolls game, if you hate us, if you like us. Just comment whatever your thoughts are, because it helps us out.
Yeah,
Subscribe
there's
to the channel if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more stuff. Thanks for watching,
yeah.
and see you guys next time.
Bye.